Good morning. Good to see everyone. Thank you for coming. So being on Zoom, our virtual dojo, Zendo, I think it's interesting that simultaneously we can all be in each other's homes at the same time. And it reminds me of Indra's net and all the jewels, each jewel reflecting every other jewel infinitely. Today I wanted to talk about a writing by Dogen called Kokyo. Kokyo translates, it's usually translated as the ancient mirror. And the reason I wanted to look at this particular fascicle today, there's a section in it which appears in Suzuki Roshi's book called Polishing the Tile. And I had read this, I guess I came across it or heard about it in the fascicle Kokyo. And so I was curious to see Dogen takes a different slant, a slightly different slant on this particular story. So I looked at Kokyo, and Kokyo, his writing is quite extensive. There's 11 sections. It's probably over 20 pages. And in those 11 sections, mainly he's discussing different dialogues and conversations between a disciple and his teacher or her teacher. So he starts off with a little introduction, and then the first dialogue he describes, he begins by describing a teacher named, let me see, Kayashata, the Venerable Kayashata. And I'll read a little of that, but first I'd like to talk about the translations in the, I was using two main translations for this. One I found online, and I don't even know who the translator was. And the other was by Nishijima Roshi, who was a disciple of Kodo Sawaki. And he was Brad Warner's teacher and Jundo Cohen's teacher, among others. But he was a great translator and translated, I believe, all of Dogen Shobogenzo. But he worked a full-time job and was a Zen teacher. He would come home from work and then go into his room and just translate. And that was pretty much his life, you know, in addition to his teaching. But so he translates Kokyo as the eternal mirror rather than ancient, but I think they both have that connotation. So I'll read his introductory paragraph to this writing. Ko means ancient or eternal. Kyo means mirror. So Kokyo, the eternal mirror or the ancient mirror. And what this means is the question. In this chapter, Master Dogen quoted Master Seppo Gison's words, "When a foreigner comes in front of the mirror reflects the foreigner." From these words, we can understand the eternal mirror as a symbol of a human mental faculty. The eternal mirror suggests the importance of reflection. So we can suppose that the eternal mirror is the symbol of the intuitional faculty. In Buddhist philosophy, the intuitional faculty is called prajna, or true wisdom. True wisdom in Buddhism means our human intuitional faculty on which all our decisions are based. Buddhism esteems this real wisdom more than reason or sense perception. Our real wisdom is the basis for our decisions, and our decisions decide our life. So we can say that our true wisdom decides the course of our life. For this reason, it's very natural for Master Dogen to explain this eternal mirror. So Dogen opens this as Nichijama mentioned by referencing Seppo's. It's a dialogue that Seppo had with his student. And Dogen begins his essay, what all Buddhas and ancestors accept, preserve, and individually pass on is the ancient mirror. It is their same view and their same face. It is their same image and their same casting, for they have done the same training and have realized the same truth. When foreigners come, foreigners appear in it, be they 8,000 or 100,000. When Han come, Han appear in it, be it for a single moment or for all time. When things of the past come, things of the past appear in it. When things of the present come, things of the present appear in it. When a Buddha comes, a Buddha appears in it. When an ancestor comes, an ancestor appears in it. So this is the section about Venerable Kayashatta, who was the 18th ancestor. And it's interesting because he begins with this first teacher with his childhood. So I'll read this, just a short description of Kayashatta and how it relates to the mirror. From the time he was born, a clear and bright round mirror naturally appeared along with him, the round mirror being the completely perfect mirror, a rare occurrence in any generation. Saying that the round mirror appeared along with him doesn't mean that the mirror was born from his mother. The master was in her womb, and then at the same time he emerged from her womb, the round mirror showed up, spontaneously manifesting itself right near him, as if it were some everyday household object. The significance of this term, round mirror, goes beyond the conventional meaning. Whenever the child approached anyone, it was as if he was holding a round mirror up in front of him with his two hands, yet it didn't conceal the child's face. He goes on to describe more about Kayashatta, and he said, while he was sleeping, the mirror would hover over his bed like a canopy of flowers. And then he met his teacher, the Venerable Sogyananda, and he had this dialogue. Let's see. The Venerable One asked the child, that which you have in your hands, is it truly what the what shows? Is it what isness shows? Once you realize that he's not asking, what does that which you have show, you should examine his remark carefully. Kayashatta replied in verse, the great round mirror of all Buddhas is neither flawed within nor beclouded without. We too can see it the same way, for we are alike in both mind and eye. So this was his complete sharing with his teacher, his union. It was the great mind that was intimately conveyed from west to east, the awakened mind, let's say. So Dogen goes on to talk about other mirrors and how they happen to appear in Zen teachings. And among those are Hui Ning. When Hui Ning, I think most of you are familiar with Hui Ning, who was a young monk, entered his monastery. He worked in pounding rice, and he was uneducated, illiterate, and so there was a sort of a competition that the head priest, his predecessor, the fifth ancestor, asked someone to write, who could write, the poem of their understanding. And the head monk wrote a poem about the body being the stand of a mirror and the mind being the mirror bright. And then Hui Ning came up and asked another monk to write. It was kind of a retort to the monk's poem. And he said, there is no mirror. There's no mirror stand. Nothing exists. Where can the dust land, right? So that was one of the other dialogues. And then there's an interesting section as well about the mirror, the great mirror of, I guess it's the Shinto, it is the Shinto mythology of the mirrors that were given. There were 3 mirrors bestowed on mankind. And one of those mirrors is in the shrine for Amaterasu at the great shrine of Ise. And Roshi had talked about visiting that shrine and actually being able to see the mirror. And so Dogen has a section about that as well. So all of these sections they're just, they could be studied each in themselves. But today I'd really like to look at the last section. And this is the one that Suzuki Roshi wrote about in his chapter called Polishing the Tile. So this is based on the story between Nangaku and his student Baso. And actually this story, it appears, this story appears in, it was interesting to learn. I'll read what it says. The original story appeared in the Keitoku Dentu Roku, or the record of the transmission of the lamp, which is a collection of 1,700 biographies of Chinese Zen masters. It was compiled by the Chinese master Aeon Dogen in 1004. Keitoku, or Jingde, is the name of the era during the Northern Song Dynasty in which this text was compiled and published. Traditionally, this is considered to be a collection of 1,700 koans. This story appears in the Nangaku section of the 5th volume. And this was from Okamura Roshi's. So Okamura talks about this koan, but he's actually, it's from another writing of Dogen, where Dogen talks as well about this dialogue between Baso and Nangaku. So this also appears in the Zazen Shin. And just to add something, in Suzuki Roshi's telling of this story, he starts off by saying, koans are often hard for us to understand, but if we approach them with a moment by moment mind, they're not hard to understand. So I thought that was very wonderful. So, encourage you to approach it with a moment-to-moment mind. A long time ago, when Baso of Kiangsi province was training under Nangaku, Nangaku on one occasion privately imparted the mind seal to him. This occurred just before the incident concerning the polishing of the roof tile. While staying in Chuangfa's temple, Baso had been doing seated meditation day in and day out for some 10 years or more. We can imagine what his thatched hut was like on a rainy night, and it's said that he never abandoned its freezing floor, even when it was enveloped in snow. One day when Nangaku came to Baso's hut, Baso stood up to receive him, and Nangaku asked him, "What have you been doing recently?" Baso replied, "Recently I've been doing the practice of Zazen exclusively." Nangaku asked, "What is the aim of your Zazen?" Baso replied, "The aim of my Zazen is to become Buddha." Thereupon Nangaku took a roof tile and began rubbing it on a rock near Baso's hut. Baso, upon seeing this, asked him, "Reverend monk, what are you doing?" "I'm polishing a roof tile." And then Baso asked his teacher, "What are you going to make by polishing a roof tile?" Nangaku replied, "I'm polishing it to make a mirror." "How can you possibly make a mirror by rubbing a tile? How can you make yourself into a Buddha by doing Zazen?" So this is a fairly well-known dialogue. A little background on roof tiles and mirrors. In those days, mirrors were mainly made of copper. They weren't made of roof tiles. And it was said that when the mirror got old, it was broken up. And then oftentimes they were reforged as Buddha statues. And roof tiles, often after a fire, they would be the only thing or the main thing surviving. And so a lot of times you would find them scattered around the monastery or piled in the monastery. So Nangaku here is just casually picking up a random roof tile. So what we usually think of in this dialogue is making the purpose of our sitting to achieve something in the distance, something outside of ourselves, something outside of the moment. It's as if we're saying that it's somewhere else, someone else has it, and I've got to get it. And not recognizing what is innately within us in this moment. Dogen continues, "For hundreds of years now, many people have held the view that in this story, Nangaku is earnestly endeavoring to encourage Baso in his practice. This is not necessarily so, for quite simply, the daily activities of the great teacher were far removed from the realm of ordinary people. If great teachers did not have the Dharma of polishing a tile, how could they possibly have the skillful means to guide people? Having the strength to guide people is the bones and marrow of an ancestor of the Buddha." Even though the tile was the thing that came to hand, still, it was just an everyday household object. If it were not an everyday object or some household utensil, then it would have not been passed on by the Buddha's family. So there are many stories and teachers grabbing what is close at hand um, a story of, I forget the teacher's name, but the student said, he asked him about the charcoal burner, and he said, oh, the fire's out, and the teacher dug into and there was some embers, and he blew on the embers, and the student awakened. And a story of, and I don't know who this was either, but they saw some ducks flying, and there was a dialogue, and he pinched his student's nose. So they grab everyday objects, and the student was awakened, of course. Thus it is said, thus it is that the ancient mirror was made from a roof tile. Even though the mirror was being polished, it was already without a blemish in its unpolished state. The tile was not something that was dirty. It was polished simply because it was a tile. On that occasion, the virtue of making a mirror was made manifest, for it was diligent effort of an ancestor of the Buddha. Further, some may wonder, when the ancient mirror is polished, can it ever be polished into a tile? Your state of being, your breathing in and breathing out when you're engaged in polishing is not something that you can gauge at other times. We can't look back. When we look back at our zazen, that's not our zazen. And Nangaku's words, to be sure, express what is expressible. As a result, in the final analysis, he was able to polish a tile and make a mirror. So I think one thing that Dogen is saying here is that the act of polishing is the mirror. And he's also looking at that we not look at in a dualistic way that, that a tile is something less than a mirror. They're both totally valuable in their own right. So this is a non-dualistic way of approaching the world. And this is the final section of his writing. Even when people of the present time should pick up today's tile and even we, people of the present time, should pick up today's tile and polish it, for ultimately it will become a mirror. If a tile could not become a mirror, people couldn't become Buddha. If we despise tiles as being clods of earth, we will also despise people as being clods of earth. If people have mind, then tiles too have mind. Who can recognize that there is a mirror in which when a tile comes, a tile appears? And who can recognize that there's a mirror in which when a mirror comes, a mirror appears? I loved how Dogen reconnected back to Seppo's mirror and gave that quote. Who can recognize that there's a mirror in which when a tile comes, a tile appears? And who can recognize there's a mirror in which when a mirror comes, a mirror appears? So this morning, I was lying in bed trying to sleep. It was kind of strange. I heard this sound and I thought, wow, it's like wind blowing on a tarp. It was very loud. And then I realized it was just my breath against the sheets. And I realized how we can project, how it's so simple for us to project our mind. The other day also, I had this sense of the infinity of our sense perceptions, and that each sense, we have taste, all these tastes, we have all the sounds that we can hear, the whole range, and the textures, and all of these things happening, in myriad combinations, And then how do we perceive all those sensations in our mind? How are they occurring? And how do we see things as they are without any projection, without any thinking? So I believe Dogen is pointing to that here as well. And also in the end where he connects back to Sepo's mirror, there's this continuity. I think of the circle. Well, actually, it was in our study group. We were studying the Genjo Koan in our last study group on Tuesday, and Roshi asked the question, what was Dogen's original question? And we realized his question was, if I'm already enlightened, why do I practice? Why am I doing this? He couldn't find the answer with Eisai in Japan, so it led him to China. And there he realized practice is enlightenment. It's not out in the future. And I think this is very much at the heart of what Dogen's saying as well here. Dogen talks about this in his writing called The Continuous Practice, and he opens that section of that fascicle with these lines. Very wonderful. On the great road of Buddha ancestors, there's always unsurpassable practice, continuous and sustained. It is the circle of the way and is never cut off. Between aspiration, practice, enlightenment, and nirvana, there's not a moment's gap. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.